Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Customer Sure Closed Loop podcast. Great you can join us. My name's Darren Wake, and I'm Head of Customer Success at Customer Sure. And I'm really delighted to be joined once again on this episode of the podcast by Alicia Crowther. Wonderful to have you back,
Yes,
Alicia, for this episode. So Alicia is the founder of 3 Digital Consulting here in Newcastle, and she's also joined us on 2 other fantastic contributions on other podcasts as well. So great to have you back again, Alicia. What I wanted to talk about in this episode was something a little bit different, which is about how the wider economic landscape, uncertainty, wider things going on in the world are influencing business and influencing investment and decisions businesses are taking. On just, I guess, really your take on all of that, and on also ways and ideas that stakeholders and people in businesses that want to make changes can kind of get around those issues that might be tripping them up somewhat.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time that we live in right now, and I think everyone in all companies, no matter what industry they're in, are kind of facing some really difficult decisions. And we know that sadly one of the first kind of cuts that people tend to make is in product or marketing or CX or anything like that. And so it can be really difficult for teams to kind of show their value, I think, when, we feel obviously like we're the ones that are providing a lot of value. And so I think that we have to be aware of these larger kind of global macro trends that they are going to affect the way that we do business. But I think part of our job in, kind of CX is to show the value and really show how what we're doing is having a knock-on effect on things like retention, on increased sales, on increased adoption and things like that. So again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier about just showing how we're measuring the right things, making sure we have the right data to make those decisions, and then actually making those changes on the back of the data that we see. And I know it's make it sound so simple, right? And it's difficult. So I think definitely the more that people can have a kind of forum like this where they can talk with other professionals about how are you doing that and what happened in your area and how did that work, to just be open to learn from each other. But it can be difficult to prove the return on the investment for teams such as customer experience or product. But I think it definitely is something that teams need to get a little bit better at.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think we do, I agree completely. We live in uncertain times, and in recent years there's been those macro impacts. So everyone going about their business, their daily lives, and then all of a sudden there's shockwaves, be it political upheaval or conflict or economic uncertainty in the world. It's the old thing, isn't it? It's a big shock, but then there's tremors and ripples through that affect everyone. And I think in the business landscape, it feels like those, I think in the UK, increases on employer contributions tax and also the global changes with Trump and his tariffs. It feels like it shouldn't affect companies as much as it does, but I think it does foster a situation of nervousness or reluctance or cautiousness. And like you said there, Alicia, there's areas of the business that CX, marketing, other areas where they can be reined in somewhat when really they shouldn't be. So, Hey, sorry for interrupting the video, but I'll be quick. Now, is your VOC program really making an impact, or are hidden gaps really holding you back? Take our free VOC maturity assessment to get instant insights and actions to improve your VOC program. It only takes 5 minutes and you'll be closer to take your VOC program to the next level. Click the first comment to find out more. Now, let's get back to the video.
Yeah, and it's difficult because, I think if you're in, let's say you're in finance or you're HR or you're in engineering, you kind of have a deliverable almost of an output of, if I have 20 people and they write 20 things of code, then this is what you get in the end. Whereas what we do within CX or product and marketing can be slightly different. And so, it's back to what we said before about really making sure that you understand the data and the measurements that are important to your team and sharing that widely within the business. You have to shout it from the rooftops about how amazing and valuable valuable your team is, so that, when the tough decisions come, or when they say, we don't need you anymore, AI is going to do your job for you. Those types of things, you can say, well, yes, but there's all these other things of value that my team bring. And here's what would happen if you didn't have us to do those things. So it's a little bit of, amongst everything else we're doing, it's really kind of showing the direct value that we're bringing. And, you have to take time to do that, but it is possible.
No, absolutely. And I think what's also key is evidencing the value to senior stakeholders in the business, isn't it? And it's telling a story where it's not regarded as this is this fluffy, nice to have thing, but actually it's really important for customers and the business, and it has an impact on the business metrics that matter most to the people at the top table as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And, when you get the data that comes back from customers, sometimes it can be kind of difficult to translate that into action and knowing what to do about it. Because, again, even data is just a starting point, right? It's not telling you what to do.
Yeah.
It's just saying this is something that's problematic, or this is something that's going well. So your teams need to have that time to be able to figure out what's working, but also, the opportunity to tell the stakeholders, we've tried this and we had this result, or we've tried this and we've had this result. So, again, having them understand the way that, kind of innovation or creativity works, and that sometimes things won't work, and that's okay. We can keep going forward. And you mentioned before about how all the uncertainty really leads to fear. And I think we started off a few episodes ago talking about that, where fear just creates that no change and static, and we can't have that in today's business world. We cannot stay, because the world around us is changing so much. Like you say, whether it's the taxes, the tariffs, supply chain, all sorts of things are operating, no matter whether you're on the high street or you're, a big software company, there's going to be changes. And so you have to be comfortable in that kind of fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because often when there's changes in that macro environment, people might become somewhat paralyzed or nervous, and they just think we've just got to hunker down and just focus on the core thing that we're doing. But I think there's a risk there that you might ignore customers' voices or colleagues' voices in making things better, that can ultimately make things better for the organization anyway, like reduced, we mentioned in a previous episode, putting things right to reduce call volume, putting things right to reduce costs to serve through complaints and things. So there's lots of things that are good for the customer, but also good for the business as well, by doing some of the actions that you might need to take. So it's not a case of, goodness, let's just paralyze ourselves and hope for the best and hunker down and it'll blow over, So.
Well, and I think, in addition to all the changes, there's always changes in the, kind of work and productivity space as well. So companies, when they're looking at tightening their belt, maybe it's an opportunity of not getting rid of a team, but maybe bringing in a tool that's more effective and allows, this takes me now less time to do this. And so, everybody loves to complain about like certain types of spreadsheet tools and things like that. But, there's some amazing software startups out there that are doing some really amazing things where you're not multiple data entry and copy paste all over the place and introducing error. So maybe your business can save money that way. And then you can still retain your team and your budget and things like that for other things. So I think, again, it's a matter of taking stock of everything that's going on around you in the macro world, but also within your own industry and within the kind of software tools that your business uses, and see where do we have opportunities to make change. And if we need to save money, where can we do that? We were just talking again, even about marketing has changed so much, right? And a lot of people are doing user-generated content now. They don't have the big swish offices, and they're just taking a smartphone out on the street and interviewing customers about, what do you think about this? So again, there's ways of doing things differently, even when, the belts are getting a little bit tighter. So.
Yeah. It's a really good point, actually, because it also feeds into what we said in the last podcast, where we're talking about innovation and creative thinking. And I think some of those innovation and creative thinking can also be cost saving as well, that rather than hunkering down and thinking, well, let's just wait for everything to blow over because things are uncertain, or there's goodness knows what's happening in the world. You could actually have more of those innovation sessions and say, look, what can we do to improve, but also with a view to they may well include cost savings as well, or efficiency savings as well.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of the employee experience being so tied to the customer experience is a really big part of that, because if your employees are feeling overworked and undervalued, just like your customers, right? Then they won't be happy, and then you'll lose the good people that you have working for you. So there is so much opportunity to look for. How can we internally? I think you mentioned earlier something about like having even a customer feedback box for your internal employees. What can we change, and what would make you feel more valuable here? Because again, even just with the employment market being so unstable at the minute, there's so many layoffs that have been happening over the last couple of years, and people that felt like they were in safe jobs or safe industries maybe don't feel that way anymore. So really looking for ways to value your employees is so valuable as well, because you can save money, but also keep happy employees too.
Yeah. I've actually seen companies in the past where they've actually asked the questions part of that employee engagement feedback survey of how could we become more efficient? How could we save money? Even a straightforward question. You've obviously got to be careful how you position it, so it's not an alarm bells of and ideas of what's it? An example I heard of people saying, well, actually, let's just change all the light switches so it's those ones that automatically time out. You know what I mean? To reduce our energy costs.
Yeah.
Lots of different things that people have come up with to make efficiencies there as well. Yeah.
Well, and we've said it before. I mean, the people on the ground have the best ideas because they're the ones that live it and see it every day. So whether that's the internal employees, but also the people that are talking to your customers on the phone or your sales team, they're the ones that are actually out in the field hearing from customers about like what is their biggest frustration, or, I can't believe I have to do this again. So, really being open to getting feedback in any format. Of course, we have our structured surveys, but there's also a lot of other ways to get feedback too.
Yeah, no, interesting. Yeah. And one of the things we hear a lot about is ROI and proving ROI or evidencing ROI, and to justify it to the powers that be that they need to keep doing X, Y, and Z is that return on investment evidence. Have you got any thoughts on what you've seen work well to evidence that ROI, or how we can perhaps how organizations can find it or use it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying about making sure you're measuring the right things. So I've worked with teams where they were measuring the number of user tests they did, or they were measuring the number of different prototypes they come up with.
Yes.
But that's not really valuable. That doesn't mean anything to, when you take that to senior stakeholders and say, we talked to, 20 different customer sessions last quarter. Okay, and like what? So what? So, you want to be focusing on measuring things that actually do show that value. So, again, maybe your new design is showing how you save the customer's time, or your customer testing is showing, yes, I would use this product, or yes, I would pay this much for it. So it's really just making small tweaks. I think sometimes in the questions you're asking or in the data measures that you're using to kind of tell the story of your team that are really anchored around, again, the idea of business value and user value. And again, we talked about this previously, but you have to keep those two in balance. You can't have something that overly supports the business, but then the customers aren't happy.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, you can't have something that overly, kind of inflates the customer's perspective without, we can't pay for the lights now because we're keeping the customers too happy. So it's a lot to keep in mind and keep that balance, I think, but it definitely is possible.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I think the whole ROI piece, I kind of think of it slightly different. I think prove it makes a difference. You're right about measure things and prove it makes a difference. So if you're measuring the right things, and the measurements might be using internal metrics, so it may be call volume, it may be volume of complaints, it may be volume of orders, it may be tangible revenue, but it's linking an activity with, or it may not be a metric, a revenue metric, it may be just a productivity metric, or a time saved, or hours, time spent on task X, Y, and Z. And if you track that and they say, well, actually, it's gone from this to this, then that's the measurement piece. And then you're proving the activities you're doing have an impact, really. I think that's the key. Because often people think with ROI, you've got to put pound signs to everything. Of course, that's the ideal, but if you take a step back, it might be just a time saving, a volume saving in whatever format.
And I think a lot of companies are not great at making sure that they understand, before they charge off on some transformation project, making sure they understand the as is and how much the as is costs now. So for example, I was working with a team and I was asking, how much does it cost for someone to call into the customer contact center? And they couldn't answer that question. So companies need to make sure that they have those measures in place. Yes. And again, work it out, we love math, right? So work it out, how much the software costs for the telephone lines, how much the employees' time cost. Put all of that in there so that you understand, well, hang on a minute, if we are able to cut 5 seconds off of this call time, that would save us such and such amount. How can we do that? And as we said before, don't optimize to the benefit of the business without thinking about the customer, because then you'll have, again, unhappy customers. But how can we look at, if we spend such and such on this thing now, and then if we transform it, what is that return really for that? So I think making sure that you have those baseline measures in place is so critical. And, you've got different people in the business that will be able to tell you, hopefully your team has business analysts or someone like that can help, or service designers that can help answer some of those questions about how much are we actually paying for this now? And I think some companies might be quite surprised. So.
Yeah, no, I absolutely very surprised. Yeah, and I think things like innovation and thinking things slightly different. For example, reducing repeat calls or customers chasing for things, and then often manifests itself in complaints or just dissatisfied customers. And an innovation might be, like we touched on this in an earlier podcast, about sending an SMS notification to people, and there's a cost to do that. There's a cost to, have the systems and the SMS sending cost and one thing and another. But the cost saving may be that if you do root cause analysis on satisfaction data, well, if we do that, then our repeat call volume might drop 20%. And like you were saying there, if you've got the measurement of an inbound call cost to handle, and the cost of the contact center and the associated cost with doing so, then you'll have a cost saving number. It might be a bit of a back of the envelope calculation, but it's fine. Let's say we all love math, so we'll work it out. Even if it's slightly crudely, say, okay, the cost of an SMS to a customer's base is this, but then the saving is a financial one, but also a customer experience uplift as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said before, your team really should be looking at different ways of solving a problem. So you shouldn't just say, we're going to do this. You should be testing and experimenting around what should we do. And then a part of that is, what does each of these cost? But I think something, as we said before, with I'm a qualitative person, so I'm a very fuzzy person. But, there's also the customer aspect of things that are difficult to measure, such as trust.
Yes.
So when you were talking about the SMS, one of the things I was working with a team in financial services on, and they were saying, well, but if I get a text message from my bank, is it really from my bank, or is it a scam? And so, sometimes, even though it's a really good idea and it might be the most cost efficient way to do something, because of, again, the macro kind of things that are happening in the world, customers don't trust that, or they don't believe that it's really from you. So all of that needs to kind of be taken into consideration as well. And I don't know how you measure, something like that. It's difficult to measure trust. And, obviously we have sentiment scores and things like that, but that's something, it can't be just hard numbers all the time.
No. Absolutely right. I think that there's other things. And I think what I'd say to any department head in CX or indeed any department is, when they have these meetings with stakeholders, is be armed with some measurement metrics in mind because the question people always ask is, prove this will make a difference, prove it will make things better. And sadly, senior stakeholders don't always have the hat on, which prove it makes things better for customers. The one they're more focused on is prove it makes things better for us financially, reduce cost, increase revenue, increase sales. They're the languages these people more like to speak. So I think our recommendation would always be, have some metrics in mind that, like you said earlier, about a previous state and a future state of what that shift might be.
Yeah, and some of the ways that I've had conversations with stakeholders as well is kind of thinking about, we can have the back of a napkin paper plate version of how we could solve this problem, or we could have the gold-plated, all singing, all dancing way of how we could solve this problem. And then maybe what we actually want to do is something that's in the middle. So I think when you're having the conversations with stakeholders, it's about presenting them with options. And like you say, if you've got the data and you've worked it out and, we could do this, and it would maybe move these numbers, but it might affect this in a negative way. We could do this, but it's probably too expensive. It'd take too long, blah, blah. So I think really, again, showing that you've come and you've done your homework before and you've thought through a lot of the different options. And I think that shows the kind of readiness or preparedness that maybe, again, they're not used to seeing. And that can have an impact on whether or not, okay, let's do the funding. And sometimes, if you say, well, this is really expensive, but we're willing to do this other thing instead, and that's maybe what you were really going for, right? So having that, kind of, we could do this, but here's a more, faster, less expensive way we could solve that problem as well. So, again, it is a difficult time with budgets, and we do have to make decisions. And I think sometimes when times are a little bit less lean, we are frivolous in the way that we run businesses, and we don't think about the things that we're burning through and the resource and the time, employee time and things like that. So I think all of the data can really just help us to be more effective at the way we do our jobs. And then, again, it can translate into that customer experience, hopefully uplift as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Some really insightful thoughts there, Alicia. Thank you very much. I think it's a continuing challenge we face of evidencing the ROI, and people are doing the best jobs they can, but due to wider macro factors, there's always a squeeze on things. So some useful kind of tips there.
Yeah, and I think it's, just to wrap up, I think that's what I hope that people can take from this, is that change and uncertainty is always going to be around the corner. So the more that you implement some of the things that we've talked about into the way that your team operates now, you're kind of creating a cushion or a buffer for yourself. If things change, and maybe they change for the better in the future, or maybe they change for such and such, this tax, this tariff, whatever has changed. But your team has had the time to kind of think through some of those things, and you're showing up as the knowledgeable person instead of showing up and being told, oh, sorry, your entire team's being let go, because you haven't shown that value.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's being on the front foot of that innovation and forward thinking, and thinking about how we have some measurement or some finger on the pulse of the impact the actions we make. And then before those uncomfortable conversations might come up about budget cuts or any other slashing of headcount, whatever it might be, you've got some evidence that what you're doing is making a bigger difference.
Yes.
Yeah. Very insightful. The only certainty is uncertainty. The only constant is change, and all those other cliches.
That's why they make all the posters with all those sayings, right? Because it's true. So hang in there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you very much,
Great, yeah,
Alicia. No, it's a pleasure to speak to you again on this podcast episode. So we've done a few episodes with Alicia, who's given us some fantastic insights and ideas in a number of different areas that all those podcasts are available. So I just encourage all of you to, we can say this, Alicia, find Alicia Crowther on LinkedIn, do connect. So Alicia is the founder of 3 Digital Consulting. So we'll be obviously linking you in the LinkedIn communications and all the content we put out. But please do get in touch and interact with us on the show, because we'd love to know what your thoughts are on the topics we've discussed, particularly around the ROI and evidence and the impact. And if you've got ideas, thoughts, what's worked, what's not worked, or questions, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you and help you out. Just say thank you very much for coming in and joining us, Alicia.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
You'll be welcome back anytime. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.